The show began the way many shows begin, but something underneath it felt misaligned, like a familiar room with the furniture moved just enough to make you uneasy. The lights were bright, the ring was clean, the crowd was loud in all the expected places, yet the energy never fully settled. There was a drag to the air, a quiet hesitation between reactions, as if everyone was waiting for a moment they couldn't name. The performers in the ring worked through their segments, but even their movements felt careful, restrained, like they were unconsciously bracing for interruption. Commentary tried to fill the space, leaning into routine observations, but their cadence lacked confidence. There were pauses where there shouldn't have been, sentences that trailed off without resolution. It wasn't silence, but it wasn't comfort either. The crowd sensed it. Chants rose and died quickly. Cheers fractured into scattered applause. People looked toward the entrance ramp more than the ring, scanning for something that hadn't been promised but somehow felt inevitable. Nothing happened. That was the problem. The absence itself became heavy. The longer it stretched, the more it pressed down on everyone in the building. Security shifted near the barricades. Ringside officials exchanged glances. Cameras lingered on faces in the audience that looked confused rather than excited. This wasn't anticipation, it was apprehension. The kind that creeps in when you realize the night might go somewhere you didn't agree to. Backstage, the tension was sharper. Wrestlers stood near monitors, arms folded, conversations hushed. No one joked, no one laughed. Even those not scheduled to appear stayed close, unwilling to leave. A few checked their phones, refreshing messages that never came. Authority figures moved quickly, speaking in clipped tones, their body language betraying concern they couldn't broadcast. Something had shifted in the internal rhythm of the show, and everyone felt it. Then the match in the ring ended, not with celebration, but with an awkward quiet. Music didn't hit immediately. The referee raised a hand, unsure. Commentary searched for words and found none. The arena lights remained unchanged, yet the atmosphere darkened all the same. It felt like the pause before a storm that wasn't supposed to be on the forecast. People leaned forward in their seats, not thrilled, not afraid yet, just aware that whatever came next would change the night in ways they couldn't take back. The silence stretched too long to be accidental. It pressed against the crowd until even the most restless fans stopped moving, caught in the shared instinct to wait. Commentary tried again, voices lower now, cautious, as if speaking too loudly might trigger something. They speculated without committing, offering half-thoughts that dissolved before becoming statements. The uncertainty made the air feel thick, difficult to breathe through. A few scattered boos attempted to break the tension, but they sounded weak, quickly swallowed by the larger quiet. People weren't angry, they were unsettled. Phones came up, recording nothing but an empty ramp and a ring that suddenly felt small. Security tightened their formation. Ringside staff glanced toward production, searching for cues that never arrived. This wasn't the controlled chaos of entertainment. It was a moment slipping beyond its handlers. Then movement appeared at the top of the ramp. Not dramatic, not announced. Just a shape emerging from shadow, slow and deliberate. No music accompanied it. Now, that absence landed harder than any sound could have. The crowd reaction fractured instantly. Some gasped, some froze. Others didn't react at all, as if their bodies refused to accept what their eyes were seeing. RHEA Ripley stepped forward without urgency, without acknowledgement. Her presence didn't demand attention. It absorbed it. The way she walked wasn't triumphant or aggressive. It was heavy, grounded, like someone returning to a place they never truly left. Commentary faltered completely. One voice tried to speak and stopped. Another whispered her name, not as an announcement, but as a confirmation to themselves. The ring felt farther away with every step she took. The crowd parted emotionally, split between awe and discomfort. Cheers tried to form, but collapsed into murmurs. This wasn't a hero's return. There was no relief, no joy. It felt intrusive, like witnessing something private that wasn't meant for public consumption. Her eyes stayed forward, unreadable, unflinching. In the ring stood Jade Cargill, already dominant in her stillness. She didn't retreat, she didn't posture. She simply turned, meeting the moment without expression. To forces occupying the same space, without touching, without sound. The arena seemed to shrink around them. No bell rang. No authority intervened. It was as if the show itself had lost the ability to respond. When Rhea reached the ring, she stopped just short of entering, letting the pause linger. The silence was complete now. Thousands of people united in breathless paralysis. Even those who wanted to cheer couldn't bring themselves to break it. This wasn't spectacle. It was confrontation without violence, tension without release. WWE hadn't planned for this, and everyone in the building knew it. The moment ended without resolution, which made it worse. Rhea didn't enter the ring. Jade didn't move. Eventually, production forced the show forward, but the damage was already done. Commentary resumed with strained professionalism, voices carefully neutral. Avoiding the emotional truth of what had just happened, the crowd never fully recovered. Every segment that followed felt secondary, like filler placed after something far more important than the rest of the night. Backstage, the atmosphere fractured. Some wrestlers avoided eye contact, choosing silence over speculation. Others whispered urgently, replaying the entrance in fragmented sentences. Careers suddenly felt fragile. Plans felt temporary. People who had been confident hours earlier now questioned where they stood. The locker room wasn't united in excitement. It was divided by fear and uncertainty. Authority figures moved from room to room, attempting damage control that didn't exist yet. Phones buzzed with messages from executives, sponsors, partners, asking the same question in different ways. What just happened? No one had a clean answer. The return hadn't been announced because it hadn't been framed. There was no narrative safety net, no clear direction to point to. Only consequences waiting to unfold. Media outlets reacted immediately, clips spreading faster than explanations. Analysts debated whether the moment crossed an invisible line. Fans argued online, some praising the realism, others disturbed by it. The discussion wasn't about wins or losses. It was about tone, about whether the company had invited something it couldn't control. The word uncomfortable appeared more than any other. Jade Cargill felt the weight most acutely. Her presence during the moment had been unspoken but undeniable. She hadn't flinched, and that restraint became a burden. Expectations shifted overnight. Every future appearance would now be measured against that silence, that stare, that unplanned collision. Legacy pressure arrived early and without mercy. Rhea Ripley remained unseen after the entrance. No interviews, no statements. That absence fueled speculation more than any promo could have. People wondered whether this was a warning or a reckoning. Friends and family reportedly felt the strain, the sudden spotlight cutting into private life with sharp edges. This wasn't a return that brought closure. It reopened wounds no one had prepared to treat. By the end of the night, the show had technically concluded. But emotionally it hadn't. The arena emptied quietly. Conversations followed people into the parking lot, into their cars, into their homes. The feeling lingered, heavy and unresolved, refusing to be filed away as just another moment. The days that followed were marked by tension rather than clarity. Meetings were held behind closed doors, their outcomes vague even to those involved. Schedules were adjusted without explanation. Some wrestlers requested time off, citing exhaustion that felt more psychological than physical. Others trained harder, driven by a fear they couldn't articulate but couldn't ignore either. Publicly, the company maintained composure. Statements were carefully worded, acknowledging the moment without defining it. That restraint only deepened the unease. Fans sensed that something fundamental had shifted, that the lines between performance and reality had blurred in a way that couldn't be undone. Trust wavered, not in anger but in uncertainty. Media coverage intensified. Panels debated whether the silence had been intentional or accidental. Was it brilliance or miscalculation? The lack of answers turned the moment into a mirror, reflecting whatever fear or hope the viewer brought with them. Some called it necessary. Others called it reckless. Almost everyone agreed it felt real. Jade Cargill faced questions she hadn't prepared for. Interviews focused less on her achievements and more on that frozen moment, on what it meant to stand across from someone returning without permission. She answered carefully, but the pressure showed. The expectation to carry the division, to anchor a future that now felt unstable, weighed heavily. Confidence remained, but it had sharpened edges. Rhea Ripley's silence persisted. Sightings were rumored, unconfirmed. Each absence amplified her presence. Wrestlers spoke of her name in lowered tones, not out of fear of her, but fear of what her return represented. The idea that control could slip, that the script could fracture, unsettled everyone who relied on structure to survive. Families felt it too. The sudden scrutiny strained relationships, turning private spaces into extensions of public debate. This wasn't just about wrestling anymore. It was about identity, about what happens when a persona collides with expectation and refuses to conform. As weeks passed, the industry adjusted, but the discomfort never fully faded. The entrance became a reference point, a dividing line between before and after. It wasn't celebrated, it was remembered. And that memory carried weight no championship could balance. Time has a way of dulling spectacle, but this moment resisted erosion. It stayed sharp, replayed not for excitement, but for examination. Viewers watched again, noticing details they missed the first time, the hesitation in commentary, the way the crowd seemed to lean back rather than forward, the stillness that felt heavier than violence. It became less about what happened and more about how it felt. For some, the return forced a reckoning with why they watch it all. Is it for comfort, for predictability, or for moments that challenge the boundary between performance and truth? The discomfort lingered because it didn't offer answers. It asked questions instead, quietly, relentlessly. Jade Cargill continued forward, every step scrutinized. Her strength remained undeniable, but now it carried expectation layered with doubt. Leadership isn't just about dominance. It's about absorbing pressure without breaking. The silence she stood in became part of her story, whether she wanted it or not. Rhea Ripley eventually returned to television, but the first entrance was the one that mattered. It framed everything that followed. No explanation ever fully satisfied because explanation wasn't the point. The power of that night lived in what was withheld, in what wasn't resolved. Backstage, the locker room slowly found a new equilibrium, but the memory stayed close. Wrestlers spoke about it the way people talk about storms they survived. Not with excitement, but with respect for the damage narrowly avoided and the damage quietly done. The industry moved on because it always does. New feuds emerged. New moments competed for attention. Yet every so often, in a pause that lasted a second too long, the feeling returned. That wrongness. That silence. In the end, the moment refused to be categorized. It wasn't a comeback designed to inspire. It wasn't chaos meant to shock. It was a fracture in the routine. A reminder that control is fragile and that some returns don't bring closure, only wait. And the question that lingered long after the screens went dark was never about who would win. It was whether the audience was ready for what happens when the show stops protecting them from reality, and whether they truly wanted it to start again.